Hi, it's David Casino. In the last episode, we added speech to text so that when the user talks into their device, it converts it into text. But we need a way to store that data so that it's there the next time they come back. And that's what we're going to do in this episode. Okay, we're going to actually develop on the simulator today. I'm going to go ahead and hit run, and I've got my simulator up. And you can see in cursor that we're going to be deploying to the simulator. In the last episode, the audio wasn't working on the simulator, and I was incorrect. It was actually that my headphones were hijacking the audio signal, and it wasn't actually getting to the simulator, but it worked on Chrome for some reason. Anyway, I'm going to record this episode without my headphones on, because I think it's more fun to develop on the simulator. So here we have our app that we built, we got our sample data, and we have this microphone button. So when I click the button, you'll see how it turns to dark red, and it's actually recording my audio right now. And over here in the console, you can see that it's listening. We're getting some text output that it's working. And if I click the button again, the status should change to basically done. So it's no longer listening. And this is a little bit annoying. Like, I want to be able to hold the button, talk, and then release the button instead of having to click it on, not really know what's happening, and then click it off. So let's fix that before we start adding the storage piece. So we're going to pull up cursor, and we're going to choose main.dart, which is the file we've been working on, and I'm going to tell it what I want. So instead of the microphone button toggling on and off when I click it, I want to press and hold to record speech to text. And when I release the microphone button, it should stop listening. Okay. So we're using Claude Sonnet again today, and it's going to recommend some changes. And so you can see the gesture detector now says on press start and on press end, which is more of how I want the app to actually function. So let's go ahead and click apply. And it's gotten rid of this is listening flag. Okay, it's changed the way that this function is working. And we're actually outputting listening, which is cool. So it's going to hopefully display something to the UI. And let's see any other changes down here. Aha, this is the big one. So instead of a floating action button, we now have a gesture detector. And that's going to detect when I'm pressing the button and when I let go of the button. So we'll go ahead and hit accept. I'm going to save this. It looks like we might have a syntax error. If you look in this right-hand panel here, you can see this kind of red dot. It's really tiny. And there's some kind of warning here. And oh, it's just telling me that it removed those lines. So we'll go ahead and refresh. We'll come back to our simulator. Okay, application restarted. So I'm going to press and hold the button. And there you go. You see that it's actually capturing my text. Now let's see if it turns off when I release the button. So I'm going to let go now. And you can see it says done. This is much better. This is exactly how I want the speech to text to work. Okay, so now that we have a little bit better microphone interaction, let's actually capture this data, and we're going to add it to the list of items that you see here in our sample data. So eventually we don't want to use sample data, we want to use the real input that the user is entering. So let's build upon this, and I'm going to start a new chat because we kind of fixed that bug, and better to move on than confuse cursor with things that we've already done. So I'm going to say after the user stops speaking and we have the translated text, let's add it to the list of brain dumps and display it in the existing list. I want to also use the current time that I did it. So if you saw our sample data earlier, we have this big JSON chunk, here we go. And this just has random dates that I asked cursor to insert, but we want to use the actual time right now. So let's ensure the timestamp is the current time and use the same format as the sample data. Okay, so we asked it to do a lot. Let's see how it handles it. Okay, we're getting a pretty quick response here. We're decoding our JSON. Aha! So it's actually inserting it into this existing list, and hopefully it'll show up on the screen. So I'm going to click apply, and we're going to go through the different lines here. Okay, so as long as it's not listening and no speech detected, we're going to insert it into the list. Okay, this looks pretty good. We'll hit accept, and let's run it. All right, this is the big test. Will it actually insert it into the list? I just had an idea for a new song I want to compose. It should be titled Brain Dump. I'll let go of the button. Okay, so it did something, and you can see here it put September 30th. Oh, that is today, at 2:46 p.m. Now, it's actually 10:46 in my local time, so we're going to want to fix that so that it's using my current time zone. But this is good. It actually put it in the list. It put it on top, and you can see that the data is captured. This is great. We could go ahead and fix this. Let's just fix this now while we're here. All right, so I'm going to let it know that it worked so it doesn't try to go and like fix something. And I'm going to say, this worked great, but I want the timestamp to display in my local time zone. And let's see if we can figure this out. Certainly we'll modify the code and the format timestamp function. Here's how we can do this. Okay, so it's going to parse the time. Oh, and it says to local. Okay, which is my local time zone. All right, so it creates an ISO. Yeah, so it just added these two lines, it looks like. Let's just check. Let's see if it did anything else. So you can use these up and down arrows. Yeah, and it just made these two changes. This is a nice little change. I always like to do small incremental changes so you keep making forward progress. We're going to hit accept. And it actually fixed it already. Like it captured the data in an ISO timestamp, and it's just displaying it in my current time zone, which is exactly what I wanted. Okay, so we've implemented the improved microphone capability. We've added it to our list. Now, it's great that we can have this variable, but if I restart, let's do that right now. I'm going to restart the simulator, restart the app in the simulator, and it's probably not going to have that data, right? Because it's just in a variable that lives during that session. So if I reload, I'm expecting to just see the sample data that we had hard-coded in our application in this JSON right here. Okay, so it's loading on there, and you can see it's gone, right? So September 30th is no longer there. So that's kind of the purpose of this episode. We need a way to store this data so that when the user closes the app and comes back, it's actually there. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do this, and we're going to use something called Shared Preferences, which is a library from Flutter. I've used it before in Calorie Talk, another app that I built using Cursor, and it basically stores it on the device. So if you're on an iPhone, it actually stores it on the hard drive of the iPhone. If you're running this in Google Chrome also has local storage, and it's able to store it in the browser as well. Now this has limitations, so if the user clears their cache in Google Chrome, or on the iPhone or Android device, if they delete the app, it also deletes all the data. So eventually we're going to store this data in the cloud, but in order to make forward progress and kind of start building the user interface of the app and building out the features, we're just going to use shared storage. That's totally sufficient for our purposes now. All right, so I'm going to start a new chat. I want to store the brain dumps on the device's storage, so when I return to the app, all of my data is still there. I'm just giving it really general instructions. I'm not telling it to use shared preferences, which I'm thinking it's going to recommend, but we'll see. It's still there. To store the brain dumps on the device's storage, we'll need to use the shared preferences package in Flutter. All right, so it's actually recommending which file that I want to add to my PubSpec YAML. And I made the same mistake that I always make. I didn't add PubSpec YAML to the list of files I want the chat to consider. And that's easily fixed. So I can just copy this prompt, and I'm going to start a new chat, and I'm going to add PubSpec YAML this time, because it's just nice when it can inject the code into the proper file rather than you having to copy and paste it, and it gives it more context for actually building this. There's one more thing we could do, which I think this would be a good time to introduce this feature of Cursor. You can actually give Cursor the documentation for a library that it's recommending you use, and we're hoping it'll grab the latest one. I'm going to pull up a Safari window. And because it's recommending shared preferences, I'm just going to type shared preferences Flutter into here. And if we load the package, you'll see the current version is 2.3.2. Now let's see what Cursor recommended. Cursor recommended, oh, that's in a previous chat. So I can just click on this previous chat. It recommended 2.22, which is pretty close to the latest version, but again, we might as well use the latest one. So I want to show you something first, because this is going to be really powerful later. And if you give Cursor access to the documents of all these packages you're using, it'll make better suggestions. It actually will have access to whatever libraries you're using and their actual documentation. So if we come here, there's this API reference here under documentation. We're going to click that, and we're going to copy the URL for that documentation. And I can show you how to do this using Cursor. If I just tag it, it will pull up this prompt, but this is a way you can see all of your documentation. So I go to Settings, and I go down to Cursor Settings, and then I go to Features. You'll see there's a section for documentation. I've already added Flutter speech to text a couple days ago when I was experimenting with this. So I can click Add New Doc, and I just paste that URL I copied earlier, and I hit Enter, and it pre-populates the name. It figured out the name of the library, and we're going to click Confirm. Now what Cursor is going to do at this point, I just gave it a URL. I gave it a website. It's going to go to that website, and it's going to basically crawl that web page. It's going to scrape all the data from it, and it's going to make it available to us whenever we're using that library. So hopefully it'll give us better suggestions. And you can see the status of all your docs here. So I was experimenting with Whisper on a previous project. I've got the OpenAI documentation. I've got speech to text, which we're using in this project. And now it's got shared preferences. And if you look here, it's kind of hard to see, but there's these little indicators of the progress. And these are all green because they've been indexed. They've been pulled down to Cursor and sort of optimized. But this one's orange and it's blinking. And you can even watch what it's doing. It's indexing shared preferences library from the Dart API. And there's these 3 dots that are moving. So this is kind of working in the background to pull down that documentation and make it available in our code. We don't have to wait for this to finish. It'll still give us pretty good recommendations, but anytime we want to use this library in the future, it'll have the most up-to-date documentation. All right, so let's start a new chat. I'm going to copy this text, and I'm going to put it there. And I'm actually going to tag the documentation. So if I hit Add, and I come down to Docs, here, you'll see Shared Preferences is already here. It's not done indexing, but, oh yeah, it is actually done indexing. That wasn't too bad. So we're going to click that, and now it'll have access to that documentation. All right, so let's click Enter. And what I'm really curious about is if Cursor is going to recommend the latest version. And it didn't. It's still recommending 2.2.2. I want to do this one more time because I screwed up yet again, and I forgot to add PubSpec YAML to my context. And it could be because I'm in the wrong tab here, but let me go to main.dart. Let me add PubSpec. Okay, and I'm going to paste the prompt, and I'm just going to tag at docs and shared preferences. All right, I'm even going to tell it, please use the latest version of this library. Okay, so now it's getting to work here. And it's still doing 2.2.2. Okay, so this is something Cursor could improve upon, being more up to date. It's not too far in the past, but I always like to use the latest. So I'm going to go ahead and click Apply, and you'll see it actually opened up PubSpec YAML, which is great. But we know that the latest version is 2.3.2, so we're just going to override Cursor's recommendation and then hit Accept. And then I'm going to save this, and you can see there's stuff going on here in Cursor or Visual Studio Code that's pulling down that library, so we now have access to it. Okay, so now that we have that library, let's see what they actually want to do with the code. All right, so we've got our existing init state. Oh, and you can see here, it's calling shared preferences get instance. So it's already integrating shared preferences into our code. Let's hit apply and just see what the diff is. All right, so it's going to import that package, so we have access to it. And then we've got a lot of changes here. So it's getting rid of my sample data, which is fine. It's time to take off the training wheels and let's use real data going forward. And it's going to load the thoughts, and we've got a new function called load thoughts, and this is going to go into shared preferences, and it's going to load them up. It's going to decode the JSON, and we've also got this function save thoughts. This looks great. And then you can see in the stop listening function, it's going to call save thoughts. So I always just like to look at the code and get an idea of what it's doing. If it's recommending something crazy, I can just kind of start again with a fresh prompt. But this looks sensible. We're not going to overly analyze the code. Let's go ahead and click accept, and we're going to save that. Now, since we're using a new library and we're getting rid of all the sample data, let's go ahead and kill the app and start fresh. Anytime you make a major change, just start fresh. Just open up a new session, so that way that your application has all the latest data. If you're making a simple UI change, you can use the hot reload feature and save yourself some time, because this does take about 5-10 seconds for the app to load in the simulator. You can see here it's building and it launched the app. Okay, so we have no thoughts captured. That's great. This is like a real use case. We still want to change this later. This is kind of a little bit confusing because we want them to click the microphone button. We don't want them to press this area here. But let's go ahead and try this out now. Oh, see, I forgot to hold the button. I have an idea for a new song, and it's about brain dump. It'll have tambourines, it's going to have horns, and a guitar solo. All right, there we go. So now it captured my idea. The speech to text kind of failed. I said a guitar solo and it said a tar soul. And we're gonna have to add the ability to edit these later, because speech to text is not gonna be 100% accurate. And we wanna give the user the ability to customize it or maybe add a little extra information they forgot to say later. But this is great. So it's storing it, it's cleared out all our sample data, but now comes the real test. Let's kill the app, right? And we're not gonna say anything, and we'll see if it actually remembers this data the next time we load it. So I come over to this sort of run control here, and I'm gonna hit the red stop button. That's gonna kill the app. And see, the app is still here. I didn't delete the app. If I delete the app, the data's gone. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But since the app still lives on the simulator, let's see if it can actually remember the data that we just entered. All right, so we're gonna wait about 5 seconds for it to build. It's gonna deploy it to the simulator. And there it is. All right, so we now have memory in our app. We're able to record brain dumps and store them on the device for access at a later time. We now have the ability to capture our thoughts on the go using only our voice and store them on our iPhone or Android device. So far in this series, we've been using AI to help build our iPhone or Android app. But what if we used AI inside the app to unlock some really powerful features? We're going to get started doing exactly that in the next episode.